Montana Territory, 1885. The setting sun painted the Gallatin Valley in strokes of amber and gold, turning the modest town of Riverstone into a portrait of frontier beauty. But beauty was in short supply for 20-year-old Faith Jameson, who stood with trembling hands before the only home she had ever known, a weathered farmhouse now bearing a foreclosure notice. "No one will ever want you," the echoes of her late father's drunken predictions haunted her as she stared at the paper. Plain as fence post, stubborn as a mule, and now poor as dirt. She tucked a strand of chestnut hair behind her ear, the rich brown locks one of the few gifts her mother had left her before consumption claimed her life 12 years ago. Faith had believed one terrible truth since childhood, that she was destined to be alone in this world. The frontier had no place for unwanted women without family connections or substantial dowries. Her father's drinking and gambling had ensured she had neither. Now, with him 6 feet under and the bank claiming their modest homestead, her lifelong fear of abandonment seemed prophetic. What she wanted was simple. To keep her home, the only connection to her mother's memory. What she needed, though she'd never admit it, was someone to see past her defenses, to recognize the fierce loyalty and tender heart she concealed beneath her practical exterior. "You have 2 days to vacate, Miss Jameson." The bank manager's voice still rang in her ears. "I suggest you find employment or accommodations elsewhere." The implication had been clear. A young woman alone had limited options in a frontier town: marriage, domestic service, or the brothel at the edge of town. Faith clutched her mother's worn Bible to her chest, her one true possession, and tried to swallow the bitter truth that she would soon have nowhere to belong. Riverstone's dusty Main Street offered little hope as Faith made her way toward the general store the following morning, hoping Mr. His smile transformed his face, creating small creases at the corners of those remarkable eyes. "Matthew Zane, I manage the Circle Z ranch just north of town." The Circle Z was one of the territory's most prosperous cattle operations, owned by an Eastern investor who rarely visited. Everyone in Riverstone knew of it. "Faith Jameson," she replied cautiously, accepting her bundle with a nod of thanks. "Miss Jameson, I heard at the bank that you're good with figures and accounts." Matthew's direct gaze was unsettling. "As it happens, I'm in need of someone to help organize the ranch books before the cattle drive. Our previous clerk left suddenly." Faith blinked in surprise. "You're offering me employment?" "If you can start tomorrow." "The position includes room and board at the ranch house." He named a salary that would allow her to save enough to perhaps reclaim her home one day. "Why would you hire someone you just met?" Suspicion clouded her face. She had learned early that offers too good to be true usually were. Matthew's expression grew serious. "Because anyone who would risk their life for a stranger's child without hesitation is someone I'd trust with my accounts. The rest we can figure out as we go." Something in his steady gaze challenged Faith's deepest belief, that she was unwanted and unworthy. This offer meant survival, but accepting help from this man meant acknowledging that perhaps her father had been wrong about her all along. "I accept," she said finally, extending her hand in a businesslike gesture, "but only until I can secure my own place again." Matthew's warm hand enclosed hers briefly. "The wagon leaves at dawn. Pack whatever you need." As Faith watched him stride away, she couldn't know that this chance encounter would be the first step in dismantling everything she believed about her place in the harsh frontier world, and about herself. The Circle Z Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of Montana's finest grazing land. Faith had never seen anything like it: the immaculate 2-story ranch house, the well-maintained barns, the bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and corrals filled with the finest horses she'd ever seen. "Your room is upstairs, last door on the right," Matthew explained as he showed her around. "Mrs. Cooper is our housekeeper and cook. She'll show you where everything is." The older woman greeted Faith warmly. "About time we had another woman around here. These cowboys track more dirt than cattle." Faith's room was small but comfortable, with a real bed, desk, and window overlooking the distant mountains. After years of struggling to maintain their failing farm while her father drank away any profit, the simple comfort felt like luxury. The ranch office proved to be in complete disarray. Ledgers were months behind, receipts stuffed in drawers, and correspondence unanswered. "Your predecessor wasn't particularly motivated," Matthew explained, rubbing the back of his neck sheepishly. "Think you can make sense of it?" Faith surveyed the chaos, already mentally organizing the work. "I can. But it will take time." We have 3 weeks before the drive to Billings. That's when I'll need accurate figures. Each day, Faith rose before dawn and worked until after sunset, gradually bringing order to the chaos. Matthew frequently stopped by, checking on her progress or bringing her fresh coffee. Unlike her father, who had criticized her every effort, Matthew expressed genuine appreciation for her work. "You have a real talent for this," he remarked one evening as she explained the new filing system she'd created. "Where did you learn accounting?" Faith hesitated. "My mother taught me basic figures before she passed. After that, I taught myself from books. Father said it was a waste for a girl, but..." She trailed off, unwilling to share more. "But you knew it wasn't," Matthew finished, studying her with unexpected understanding. "Your father was wrong about many things, I suspect." The personal observation made Faith uncomfortable. She changed the subject quickly, pointing out discrepancies in the cattle counts, but Matthew's words lingered in her mind long after. As spring bloomed across the ranch, Faith found herself drawn into the rhythm of ranch life. She took her meals with Mrs. Cooper, Matthew, and occasionally the ranch foreman, Joshua Murray. Unlike the isolation of her father's homestead, the ranch buzzed with activity, cowboys riding out at dawn, cattle being moved between pastures, supplies arriving from town. Faith maintained her distance, particularly from Matthew, whose kindness threatened the walls she'd built around her heart. She reminded herself daily that this was temporary, just until she saved enough to start anew. Getting attached to this place or its manager would only lead to pain. That resolution was tested one stormy afternoon when Matthew appeared at the office door, drenched and urgent. "Faith, we need your help." Calving emergency and everyone's out with the herd. Mrs. Cooper's down with her rheumatism. She followed him to the barn where a heifer was struggling with her first birth. Without hesitation, Faith rolled up her sleeves and followed Matthew's instructions, helping to deliver the calf and then rubbing it dry with straw while the mother recovered. "Where did you learn that?" Matthew asked, genuine admiration in his voice as the newborn calf tottered to its feet. Faith shrugged, oddly pleased by his respect. "We had dairy cows. Father was usually indisposed when they calved." Matthew's expression darkened briefly. "Your father left a lot on your shoulders." "Life leaves burdens on everyone's shoulders," she countered, suddenly defensive. "You're running this entire operation for an owner who's never here." Matthew smiled ruefully. "Touché, Miss Jameson." He handed her a clean towel for her hands. "Still, there's a difference between responsibility and neglect." That evening, exhausted but satisfied, Faith joined Matthew on the porch. The storm had cleared, leaving a spectacular sunset painting the mountains. "My father wasn't always as he was at the end," Faith said softly, surprising herself by offering the explanation. "Mother's death broke something in him." Matthew nodded, his profile gilded by the fading light. "Grief can poison a man if he lets it." "Is that why you're here?" Faith asked boldly. "Running from grief?" Matthew's eyes widened slightly at her perception. "In a way, my father expected me to join the family banking business in Boston. When I refused, choosing the West instead, he disowned me." He gazed toward the distant mountains. "I believed I could only be free by being completely alone." "And now?" Faith asked, recognizing in his words her own belief in isolation as safety. "Now I'm not so sure that's true." His gaze shifted to her face, warm with something that made her heart quicken. "Some connections make you more yourself, not less." Faith looked away, unsettled by how easily he had verbalized her deepest fears. "I should check those breeding records before tomorrow." As she hurried inside, Faith couldn't deny that something had shifted between them and within her. Matthew's words had touched a truth she wasn't ready to examine. That perhaps her belief in her own unworthiness was the real prison, not her circumstances. The following weeks brought new challenges as the ranch prepared for the annual cattle drive to Billings. Faith had restored order to the accounts, documenting every calf, cow, and expense with precision. She found unexpected satisfaction in the work, in being trusted and valued for her skills. One evening, as she finished the final tally, Matthew entered with news that sent a chill through her. "Faith, I've just heard from town. The bank is selling your father's property in 2 days, not after the cattle drive as they promised." Her heart sank. "But I haven't saved enough yet. I thought I had more time." Matthew hesitated, then spoke carefully. "I could advance you the money against future wages." Pride rose like a wall between them. I don't accept charity. It's not charity, he insisted. It's an investment in a reliable employee. And if I choose not to return after reclaiming my home, she challenged. Matthew's expression grew serious. Then I will have helped he paused, choosing his words carefully, someone I respect greatly. That's payment enough. The offer touched something deep within Faith, a place where her father's cruel predictions had taken root. Matthew saw value in her beyond her utility, something no one had done since her mother died. Thank you, she said finally, but I need to find my own way. Matthew nodded, respecting her decision, though disappointment showed briefly in his eyes. The offer stands if you change your mind. That night Faith couldn't sleep. Matthew's generosity contradicted everything her father had taught her about her worth. If Matthew Zane, who could have his pick of any woman in the territory, saw something worthwhile in her, could her father have been wrong about everything? The thought was both liberating and terrifying. Dawn found her on horseback beside Matthew, heading toward town to meet with the bank manager. They rode in companionable silence, Faith stealing glances at the man who had upended her carefully constructed worldview. In just weeks he had shown her more kindness than her father had in years, expected more from her, believed in her capabilities. As they approached Riverstone, riders appeared on the road ahead, 3 men, rough-looking and armed. Matthew tensed, shifting slightly to place himself between Faith and the approaching men. Well, if it ain't the high and mighty manager of Circle Z, drawled the lead rider, a scar-faced man Faith recognized as Jake Thornton, a former ranch hand fired for stealing. Thornton, Matthew acknowledged coolly. You're trespassing on Circle Z range. Public road, Thornton spat, his gaze shifted to Faith, his expression turning ugly. Picked yourself a pretty one, didn't you? Old man Jameson's girl, if I ain't mistaken. His eyes narrowed. Heard she's desperate now that daddy's dead and the bank's taking everything. Matthew's voice remained steady, though Faith sensed his tension. Miss Jameson is the Circle Z's accountant and under my protection. Whatever business you have, it's not with her. Thornton laughed an unpleasant sound. Ain't that sweet, the Boston banker's son playing protector to a pauper's daughter. He leaned forward in his saddle. Word is the Circle Z's driving 3,000 head to Billings next week. Mighty tempting target. That would be unwise, Matthew said, his hand casually resting near his holster. Maybe, Thornton grinned maliciously. Or maybe you should worry about who's watching your backs. He jerked his head at his companions and they rode past, deliberately crowding Faith's horse, which shied nervously. When they were out of earshot, Faith turned to Matthew. What did he mean about you being a banker's son? Matthew sighed, his shoulders dropping slightly. My father is William Zane, head of First Massachusetts Bank in Boston. Faith stared at him, pieces falling into place. Your father owns the Circle Z, you're not the manager, you're the owner. Technically, yes, I convinced him to invest in the ranch 5 years ago, but he considers it a foolish venture. Matthew's expression was pained. I didn't lie about being disowned. When I refused to return to Boston, he transferred ownership to me but cut me off otherwise. Said if I wanted to play cowboy, I'd do it without family money. Why didn't you tell me? Faith demanded, feeling somehow betrayed. Because people treat you differently when they know you have money, he said quietly. They either want something from you or resent you. I wanted you to know me, not my circumstances. Faith understood the sentiment all too well. She had experienced the opposite her entire life, judged for her lack of means rather than her character. Still, the deception stung. You should have told me, she said finally. Yes, he agreed, I should have. The meeting at the bank brought more unwelcome news. Not only was the homestead being sold, but the price had increased beyond what Faith could hope to pay, even with Matthew's offered advance. The bank manager was unmoved by her pleas for more time. I'm sorry, Miss Jameson, but the decision is final. The property will be auctioned tomorrow at noon. Outside the bank, Faith struggled to maintain her composure. All these years trying to hold on to that place, and now it's gone. Matthew stood beside her, respecting her grief with silence until she regained her composure. Faith, I know this isn't what you wanted to hear, but perhaps losing the homestead isn't losing everything. She turned to him sharply. That land and house are all I have left of my mother. Your mother lives in your memories, your skills, the person you've become, he said gently, not in timber and soil. His words, though kindly meant, struck a raw nerve. Easy for you to say, you chose to leave your home, mine's being taken. Matthew's expression remained compassionate despite her anger. You're right, I'm sorry. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the distance between them suddenly greater than the few feet separating their horses. Faith retreated to her room that evening, declining dinner, her thoughts in turmoil. Losing her home felt like losing the last thread connecting her to a time when she had been loved unconditionally. Yet Matthew's words about her mother living on through her nagged at her conscience. Was she clinging to the past because she feared having no place in the future? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Cooper stood at the door with a tray. Mr. Zane thought you might be hungry. Faith accepted the food gratefully, then noticed an envelope on the tray. Inside was a letter from Matthew. Faith, I apologize for my insensitivity today. I've instructed the foreman to give you time off tomorrow for the auction. If you still wish to bid on your homestead, the enclosed might help. It's not charity, it's recognition of the value you've brought to Circle Z. Whether you stay or go after tomorrow is entirely your choice. Matthew. Inside was a bank draft for a sum that would easily secure her childhood home. Faith sat with it in her hands, torn between pride and practical necessity. The money represented freedom, but accepting it meant acknowledging that Matthew saw worth in her that she had denied in herself. Morning found Faith riding toward town alone, the bank draft secured in her pocket. She had made her decision after a night of reflection, recognizing that Matthew's offer came without the strings her father's conditional affection always carried. The auction drew a small crowd, mostly townspeople curious about who would claim old Jameson's property. Faith stood quietly at the back, the bank draft burning a hole in her pocket. As the bidding began, an unexpected voice rang out, $500. Faith turned to see Thornton, the scarred former ranch hand, smirking as he placed his bid. The auctioneer acknowledged him with a nod. $500, do I hear $6? Another voice called $600. Thornton raised $700. Faith watched in confusion as the price climbed. Who would want her father's rundown property at such inflated prices? She clutched the bank draft, knowing she could outbid them all with Matthew's money, but something held her back. When the bidding reached $900, far beyond the property's worth, Thornton cast a triumphant glance in her direction before making a final bid of $1,000. The property was his. Faith approached him after the auction. Why would you pay so much for a worthless homestead? Thornton's smile was cruel. Maybe I like the view, or maybe it's because that property sits right on the trail the Circle Z drives its cattle along. His voice lowered. Your father never would sell that access to the Circle Z, now I control it. Understanding dawned. Thornton wasn't after her homestead, he was setting a trap for Matthew and the cattle drive. By controlling that narrow passage through the hills, he could demand exorbitant fees for passage or worse. Faith returned to the ranch, the unused bank draft still in her pocket, to find Matthew in the corral breaking a spirited young horse. She watched him work, admiring the blend of strength and patience he exhibited with the animal. This was a man who understood that trust had to be earned, not demanded. When he spotted her, he handed the horse off to a ranch hand and approached. How did it go? I didn't bid, she admitted. Thornton bought it for far more than it's worth. Matthew's expression darkened. Thornton, that can't be coincidence. Faith explained what she had learned about the property's strategic location. He's planning something, Matthew, I'm sure of it. That evening, Matthew called a meeting with the ranch hands to discuss the threat. The cattle drive to Billings was scheduled to begin in 3 days, and changing the route now would add a week to the journey, risking the contract with the buyers. We could try the northern pass, Joshua the foreman suggested. It's longer but safer. Too long, Matthew replied. We'd miss our delivery date and lose the army contract. What about paying Thornton's toll, whatever it is? Another hand suggested. Matthew shook his head. Give in to extortion once and it never ends. Faith, who had been invited to the meeting due to her knowledge of the property, spoke up. There's another way through, a ravine on the eastern edge of the property. It's narrow but passable for cattle if driven single file. Every eye turned to her. My father used it to move our small herd to summer pasture. It doesn't appear on any maps because it's mostly hidden by cottonwoods. She hesitated. The problem is, only someone who knows the land intimately could guide you through it. Matthew's gaze locked with hers. Would you? The question hung in the air between them. Joining the cattle drive meant committing herself to the Circle Z for at least 2 more weeks. It meant acknowledging that she had found a place where she belonged, where her skills and knowledge were valued. It meant trusting Matthew with more than just her employment. I will, she said finally. The days before the drive were filled with frantic preparation. Faith found herself drawn deeper into ranch operations, helping plan supplies and routes, her intimate knowledge of the local terrain proving invaluable. Matthew worked alongside her, their earlier tension dissolving in the face of common purpose. The night before departure, Faith found Matthew on the porch, studying the stars. Nervous about tomorrow, he asked as she joined him. A little, she admitted. I've never been on a proper cattle drive. You'll do fine. His confidence in her abilities warmed something within her. Faith, I want to thank you. Not just for tomorrow, but for everything these past weeks. I should be thanking you, she countered. You gave me a chance when no one else would. Matthew turned to face her, moonlight silvering his features. That's not true. I didn't give you a chance. I recognized what was already there. Your intelligence, your strength, your kindness. He paused, then added softly, your beauty. Faith felt heat rise to her cheeks. No one had ever called her beautiful before. Matthew. You don't see it, do you? He asked gently. How remarkable you are, how those words your father said were lies meant to keep you small. Faith looked away, his perception cutting too close to her heart. Some truths are hard to unlearn. Then let me help you unlearn them. Matthew reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. Stay not just for the cattle drive, stay at Circle Z afterward, help me build something here. Hope and fear warred within her, as your accountant. As whatever you want to be, his voice lowered. To me, you already are so much more. The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious. Faith wanted to believe in this man, in the future he offered, but years of conditioning made trust terrifying. I need time, she whispered finally. Matthew nodded, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. We have the whole drive ahead of us, no rush. But as Faith lay awake that night, she wondered if she was making a mistake by hesitating. For the first time in her life, someone saw worth in her beyond utility. Matthew offered not just employment but partnership, respect, perhaps even love, and that terrified her most of all. Dawn broke clear and cool as the drive began. 3,000 head of cattle stretched across the valley floor, guided by 20 cowboys, Matthew at the lead and Faith riding beside him. The plan was simple. Follow the usual route until they neared the Jameson property, then divert through Faith's secret ravine before Thornton realized they had bypassed his trap. For 2 days, the drive proceeded smoothly. Faith found unexpected joy in the work, the rhythm of days spent in the saddle, evenings around the campfire, the camaraderie among the hands who had accepted her presence with surprising ease. On the 3rd day, as they approached the turnoff for the ravine, Joshua rode back from his scouting position with alarming news. Thornton's got men watching the main trail and your ravine, Miss Jameson, he reported grimly. Looks like someone tipped him off. Matthew's expression darkened. How many? 8 that I could see, armed. Faith's heart sank. How could he know about the ravine? No one uses it except. Realization dawned, except my father. He must have shown Thornton at some point. Matthew considered their options. We can't turn back, and the northern pass means missing our delivery deadline. His gaze swept over the herd, then returned to Faith. Is there another way? Faith closed her eyes, visualizing the property she had walked every day of her childhood. There's the creek bed that runs under the North Ridge. It's dry this time of year and connects to Peterson's land. If he'll let us cross. Peterson's a friend, Matthew confirmed. If we can get to his property, we can bypass Thornton entirely. The new plan required splitting the herd, a risky maneuver that would send half with Joshua through a decoy route to draw Thornton's attention, while Matthew and Faith led the rest through the dry creek bed. As dusk fell, they made their move. Faith led Matthew and 10 cowboys with 1,500 cattle toward the narrow creek bed entrance, hidden by a stand of pines. The terrain was treacherous, rocky and steep in places, requiring the cattle to move single file through certain passages. You really did know every inch of that property, Matthew remarked as they navigated a particularly challenging stretch. When you're alone a lot, you explore, Faith replied, memories of solitary childhood days flooding back. They were halfway through when gunshots echoed from the direction of the decoy drive. Faith exchanged a worried glance with Matthew. Joshua knew the risks, he said grimly. We need to keep moving. They pressed on through the darkness, Faith guiding them by moonlight and memory. Just as they approached the boundary to Peterson's land, voices and the glow of lanterns appeared ahead. Ambush, Matthew whispered, signaling the men to halt the herd. Thornton must have split his forces. Faith's mind raced. They were trapped between Thornton's men and a sheer rock face, with 3,000 cattle growing restless in the confined space. Any shooting would cause a stampede in the narrow passage, killing cattle and cowboys alike. There's a side path, she whispered urgently. About 50 yards back, it leads up to the ridge. If we could get up there, we'd have the high ground. Matthew nodded. Take 2 men and go. The rest of us will keep the herd calm. Faith led the 2 cowboys back to the nearly invisible game trail she remembered from childhood explorations. They climbed in silence, the path barely wide enough for single file, until they reached the ridge overlooking the creek bed. Below, they could see Thornton and 4 men blocking the exit to Peterson's land, unaware that their quarry was now above them. On my signal, Faith whispered to the cowboys, fire over their heads, make them think there are more of us. The men looked dubious but nodded. Faith removed her hat, took a deep breath, and stood up. Thornton, she called, her voice echoing against the rock walls. You're trespassing on Peterson land now. The men below looked up in surprise, momentarily disoriented by her voice and the difficult angle. The Jameson girl, Thornton sneered when he spotted her, should have known you'd be with them. Your pa always said you were too stubborn for your own good. My father was wrong about a lot of things, Faith replied steadily, including you. He thought you were just a drunk like him. He didn't realize you were a thief and a coward too. Thornton's face contorted with rage. You're surrounded, girl. We've got men at both ends of this gully. You tell Zane to pay the toll or we start shooting. I don't think so, came Matthew's voice as he materialized beside Faith on the ridge, rifle in hand. Your men at the other end are currently explaining themselves to the sheriff. Seems attacking a legal cattle drive is frowned upon in these parts. Thornton's expression wavered. You're bluffing. Am I? Matthew raised his arm, and on cue, rifle shots rang out from Faith's cowboys, creating the impression of a much larger force on the ridge. Confusion broke out among Thornton's men who hadn't signed on for a firefight against superior numbers. 2 immediately broke for their horses. Hold your ground, damn you, Thornton shouted, but it was too late. His makeshift gang was dissolving before his eyes. It's over, Thornton, Matthew called down. Leave now and we won't press charges. For a moment it seemed Thornton would surrender. Then with a roar of fury he raised his pistol directly at Faith. Matthew moved with lightning speed, shoving Faith aside as the shot rang out. She fell hard against the rocky ground, the breath knocked from her lungs. When she scrambled to her knees, her heart stopped. Matthew lay on the ridge, blood spreading across his left shoulder. Matthew, she crawled to him, pressing her hand against the wound as cowboys returned fire, driving Thornton and his remaining man into retreat. Not as bad as it looks, Matthew gasped, though his face was pale with pain. Went clean through. Faith tore strips from her petticoat to fashion a bandage, fighting back tears. Why did you do that? Why risk yourself for me? Matthew's eyes, despite the pain, held hers with intensity. Because you're worth it, Faith Jameson, you always have been. In that moment, as her hands worked to stop his bleeding under the vast Montana sky, Faith felt the last of her father's poisonous legacy crumble away. Matthew had just proven with his life what his words had tried to tell her, that she mattered, that she was worthy of protection, of sacrifice, of love. By dawn, they had reached Peterson's ranch. The old rancher welcomed them, offering his home for Matthew's recovery, while the foreman continued the drive to Billings with most of the hands. Faith refused to leave Matthew's side as the local doctor removed the bullet and dressed the wound. He'll recover fully with proper care, the doctor assured her. Keep the wound clean and make sure he rests. For 3 days, Faith barely left the room where Matthew recuperated, changing his bandages, bringing him broth, reading to him from Mrs. Peterson's small library of books. On the 4th day, his fever broke and his strength began to return. You know, he said, watching her adjust his pillows, most women would have fled at the first sign of trouble, not you. You climbed a ridge and faced down armed men. Faith smiled slightly. Most men wouldn't have taken a bullet for their accountant. Is that all you think you are to me? Matthew caught her hand, his touch sending warmth through her. Faith, when I saw Thornton aim at you, I realized something. All my life I've been running from my father's expectations, from Boston society, from anything that felt like a cage. But the thought of losing you, he swallowed hard. That felt like losing everything that matters. Faith stared at him, her heart thundering. What are you saying, Matthew? I'm saying I love you. The words, simple and direct, hung in the air between them. I'm saying that I was as wrong in my beliefs as you were in yours. I thought freedom meant standing alone. You taught me it means finding someone worth standing beside. Tears filled Faith's eyes, not of sorrow, but of recognition, of finding at last what she had never believed existed for her. I love you too, she whispered, the words strange yet perfect on her tongue. I think I have since you offered me that job, but I was too afraid to see it. Matthew tugged her gently closer. No more fear, he murmured as their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home. 2 weeks later, the cattle drive returned triumphant from Billings, having secured not just payment for the current herd, but a contract for the following year as well. Matthew, his arm in a sling but otherwise recovered, greeted them at the Circle Z with Faith by his side. Thornton and his remaining men had been arrested by the territorial marshal, charged with attempted robbery and assault. Faith's former homestead would be sold at auction again, but this time she felt only a distant sadness rather than desperation. That evening, as sunset painted the mountains gold, Matthew led Faith to the highest point on the Circle Z property, a gentle rise overlooking the entire valley. I brought you here for a reason, he said, taking her hands in his. Faith Jameson, when I came west, I thought I was escaping a cage. Now I know I was searching for you. He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. Will you marry me, build a life with me here? Faith looked out over the land that had become more home to her in weeks than her father's homestead had been in years. Then she looked at the man before her, who had seen her strength when she doubted it herself, who had risked his life to protect her, who loved her exactly as she was. Yes, she said, feeling the last shadows of her father's predictions vanish like mist in morning sun. Yes, I will. They were married that autumn in Riverstone's small church, the entire town and ranch turning out to celebrate. Mrs. Cooper cried openly, declaring she'd known all along that the poor Jameson girl and our Mr. Zane were perfect for each other. The following spring found them on the porch of the Circle Z ranch house, watching as construction began on a new wing. Faith, her hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly, leaned against her husband's shoulder. Do you ever regret it, she asked, choosing this life instead of Boston? Matthew smiled, covering her hand with his. How could I regret the choice that brought me you? Faith thought of the frightened, defensive young woman who had arrived at the Circle Z a year before, convinced of her unworthiness, certain she would always be alone. That woman could never have imagined the joy she now knew of being truly seen, deeply loved, completely accepted. No one will ever want you, her father had said, but he had been wrong. Matthew had wanted not just her skills or her beauty, but her heart, her strength, her very self. And in finding that love, Faith had discovered the most important truth of all, that she had always been worthy of it. As the sun set behind the mountains that cradled their home, Faith and Matthew Zane stood together on the porch of the ranch. They would pass to their children and grandchildren in years to come. The Circle Z would flourish under their joint stewardship, becoming known throughout the territory not just for its cattle, but for its hospitality, its fairness to workers, and the enduring love story at its heart. For those who heard it in years to come, that story would begin simply, with a young woman who believed herself unwanted and the cowboy who saw her true worth.